Hello and welcome to the Casual Cinecast, powered by Cinelinx. My name is Chris.
My name is Justin.
And my name is Mike. In today's episode, we'll be going over what's on our minds, followed by our review of Crazy Rich Asians, directed by Jon M.
And if you want to stay up to date with what we're going to watch next and send us questions and topics you want us to discuss on the show, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Casual Cinecast. If you want to email us, you can do it at casualcinemedia@gmail.com. And as always, please don't forget to go onto iTunes if you like the show and give us a 5-star review and leave a review where you write your feedback so we can see what you guys like, what you guys don't like, and make a better show.
It helps grow the show and only makes it better for you, the listener.
Yay.
And us.
Speaking of iTunes reviews,
we've got a new one.
Awesome. I like that segue.
Right.
Can we keep it?
Sure, I'll do it.
Thanks.
All right. This comes from Utah Film Nerd, and the review says, I'm a fan. Loving your show so far, guys. Just listened to a few episodes so far, but I'm hooked.
All
well,
right.
Thanks.
Got him hooked.
Glad we hooked you, Utah Film Nerd. Welcome aboard.
If you're hooked, that could be a serious problem. There are meetings it's the casual addiction meetings, so they call it the CAM meetings.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah.
Yeah.
With that, are we ready to move into what's on our minds?
Absolutely.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's do it. So who wants to go first and what's on our minds?
I can go first. I don't really have a lot this week. I didn't get a chance to see any extra movies or anything, but I did get to start the series that is on Netflix now called The Staircase. And this one just came out on Netflix. Although it has been a series for a long time, Netflix acquired the series and I think put out a couple of new episodes to update the series. The original one came out in 2004, and it is a miniseries that documents the trial of Michael Peterson, who called the police to say that his wife fell down the stairs, and when they got there was blood everywhere and they didn't really believe his story, and they kind of have the idea that he murdered his wife and said she fell down the stairs. And so it's a bit of that sort of making a murderer, true life, true crime sort of documentary series, which I really enjoyed making a murderer. And yeah, so far this is good. I've only watched the first episode, which is, one of the ones from like 2004. I think originally it was like a 10-episode series, and they've got like 3 or 4 more episodes now. Yeah, I don't know, have you guys heard of this?
Nope.
I had not.
Those kinds of true crime documentaries are not really my cup of tea, so there could be like 10 released this year, and they all would have been under my radar.
Right. I remember hearing about this one. There was some IFC film that I had on DVD. I want to say it was like A Decade Under the Influence, that 3-part documentary on the 1970s cinema.
Yeah.
It had like a little booklet in it of like other IFC releases, and it had like a big section of the booklet was for The Staircase. And so I had heard of it before, which is kind of what intrigued me this time. I was like, okay, I remember that. And now they've added more to the story, so maybe I'll check it out. And I did. And, it's what you would expect one of those to be. I don't think so far it's like anything different. If you like making a murderer, you'll like this. If you don't, or it's not your thing, like you, Mike, then, it won't be your thing.
I watched Making a Murderer, and I did enjoy it. But like Mike, these aren't necessarily my cup of tea. I don't necessarily rush out to watch these. But I do find it interesting that they've added on to the story since it's actually happened. Like, it's kind of one of those things that the story's never truly over in these documentaries, right?
Yeah, right. I agree. That does make it intriguing to show that, like, hey, we are updating this as time goes on. It reminds me a lot of those Paradise Lost documentaries about the West Memphis 3.
Right.
I followed the first 2, whenever I was in high school, and the West Memphis 3 weren't internationally known like they later came to be known. And it wasn't until Peter Jackson's documentary and Paradise Lost 3 that was in production that things really started changing, and they had to go back and kind of alter the end of Paradise Lost 3 just to keep up with modern times. So I think it's really interesting when documentaries do that, right? Like an ongoing series tries to keep you up to date.
Right.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It helps keep it relevant for longer.
Yeah, and it looks like they've updated it twice or added on some additional material, additional episodes, whatever you want to call it. They did it once in 2012, and then now they've released new episodes again in 2018. So I'm not sure if these are going to be the end of the story or if we're just going to keep getting them as long as it stays interesting. But yeah, we'll see. Hopefully the rest of it's good. Like I said, I've watched the first like episode and a half, and both of those were definitely interesting to me. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, could you imagine being the filmmaker? And I imagine that it's the same filmmaker returning to the same subject over and over again over the years. They're almost as connected to this now as the people that are actually involved, like the lawyers and stuff, right?
Yeah, I would assume so. I imagine they're, friends or foes or, kind of family-ish at this point.
Yeah, they've been there for all the big moments and stuff. That's interesting, too.
That's it for me. Once I finish it, I'll probably report back on whether or not the whole thing's worth it, but yeah. I've started it and I'm intrigued, so yeah.
And what was that called again?
That was The Staircase, and it is on Netflix. So who wants to go next?
I'll go next. So this week, I actually watched a couple of things. First of all, I watched The Meg, which came out last week, about the big shark, starring Jason Statham. Have you guys heard of this movie?
How could you not?
Yeah. Everyone's heard of it. Have either of you seen it?
Yeah, I watched it.
Okay.
I have not seen it yet.
Yeah, okay. I would say it's very noticeably a PG-13 shark movie. There is nothing gruesome at all, except for maybe like some dead animals. It looks like the least bloodiest shark movie ever, which might sound nitpicky, but I feel like that kind of stuff is missed when it's not there in a shark movie, right?
Right.
But I also understand their need for money to try to get a PG-13 crowd in the seats.
I was watching 8th Grade at an Alamo Drafthouse, and I came out of the screening, and there was a bunch of people going into a Meg screening, and it was a family. It was like a dad, a mom, and like 3 sons that were probably like between 7 and 11, and all 5 of them had on the Meg shirts.
Oh, wow.
That like they weren't handing out at the Alamo or anything like that I saw. So I guess it intrigued families for being PG-13.
It's making a lot of money, so the PG-13 rating definitely paid off for Warner Brothers. Which brings me to my second point. This movie is so obviously catered to making its money back in China.
What?
That it is just so distracting. That's not bad in itself, right? Because you got to make your money back. But man, it is so unartfully ham-fisted in the movie. Like, they make a couple references to the Chinese government, needing to let the Chinese government know that there's a megalodon out in the world. Like, half the cast is Asian, which is good, for representation purposes. It just stinks of needing to make its money back and needing to be a hit for Warner Brothers, with the PG-13 rating and the cast and just the way the script is. It's just not great.
So does that all lead up to a bad movie? Is that the implication there?
In my opinion, yes. It's pretty dull. It's not even fun in that like B shark movie kind of way. Every time someone gets eaten by a big shark, you're kind of like, I feel like there should be more blood than this. Or it cuts away to like show you, Jason Statham or someone watching someone get eaten, right? And I don't know. So it's just a toothless B movie, but trying to be a B movie. So those B movies that try to be a B movie just result in something worse, like a C movie or something. I don't know. It's no good.
I'm right there with you, Mike. I think the PG-13 rating kind of removes its teeth and its ability to be campy. Because I think you're right. I think they knew kind of what they were doing, and they wanted to go for a campy shark movie, but because it's PG-13, they can't go over the top with it, with the blood and stuff, and make it kind of like this fun, gruesome movie, right?
Right. It's just bland and boring.
Yeah, and the other problem I really had with this movie was Jason Statham, who I like, but he is a one-note character. There's no... Not that it really calls for any depth.
See, that's... I think where I'll push back a little bit. Jason Statham is being Jason Statham here, which is fine.
Right.
He's good at that. He's good at being Jason Statham. I think a movie like this, if it were fun, he would be right at home. If he got to say the F word and he got to like swim through some blood and say like some kind of catchphrase where he swears at a shark and then does something cool. Like, lean into the campiness more.
And that's where it goes wrong. And so it's either like, because there's not the campiness or it's not a good script, everything, all the other glaring holes in the movie are just like open for you to stare and watch at and nitpick over.
Right.
And that's just kind of what I guess Jason Statham took the brunt of mine. I was just like maybe a more charismatic actor or something. But you're right. Jason Statham's just being Jason Statham.
Yeah, I think he's right at home in these B movies like the Transporter, Death Race,
Cranks.
The Cranks. The Cranks are the perfect example of what this movie should have tried to do.
Right.
Those movies are bad by all definition of the word, right? But I kind of like those movies. It's fun watching Crank and Crank 2.
And it's because they go so extreme.
Exactly.
That it's just crazy. And you're like, I can't believe they did that.
Exactly.
But in this movie, because it's PG-13, they can't go that far. And it just becomes boring.
Exactly. And Jason Statham's trying to like be a leading man who's like a role model and a father figure. And it's like, what is this?
Yeah. The key to like B-movie, campy movies being successful is keeping you having so much fun that you're not thinking about the plot or anything of that nature. But usually in order for that to work in a B campy movie, you need lots of action and gore and violence. That's what's fun about this sort of thing. And it sounds like they don't have that. But
right.
I did hear that I don't know if it was a joke or not, if someone was making it up, but like the final word that appears on the screen, is that a thing? I'm trying not to be spoilery, or should I just...
It is. It made me smile.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
But...
I liked that when I read that.
Yeah,
it doesn't make up for the movie.
It made me smile, but even saying it and bringing it up sets the bar too high. Right?
Yeah,
so
it
like,
should be a surprise,
automatically just by
probably.
you saying that, and someone's like, oh, well, I know the last word of the movie is going to be interesting. It's not going to be as interesting as we just made it out to be.
Well, if it ruins it for anybody, or if you feel like it will, cut it. But I imagine it's kind of a whatever.
Yeah, no, I'll leave it in. But if you guys liked The Meg, let me know. Tell me what I missed about this movie. I don't think it's terrible, but they definitely should have leaned more into the fun. Also, Ruby Rose doesn't have any charisma. At least not in this movie. This is my first time
that was.
really seeing her. She was recently cast as Batwoman, so...
Yeah, she had to go off Twitter.
Yeah, she's kind of popular right now. She's from Orange is the New Black.
No, I have not seen it.
Oh, I think I stopped watching before she came on.
I don't know. She's pretty famous right now. But anyway, she doesn't really have any kind of charisma in this movie, in my opinion. And anyway, that's all I had to say about that. The next thing I wanted to talk about was a film called Oh Lucy, which is a Japanese film directed by Atsuko Hirayanagi.
I'm a bit disappointed because I was kind of hoping this would be a Charlie Brown movie.
Yeah, sorry, it's not.
Dang it.
So this is a Japanese drama about a very lonely woman living by herself in Tokyo. She works in an office building and doesn't really have any friends, and she smokes a lot of cigarettes. And the only person she really speaks to or has any kind of like face-to-face with in her life is her niece. Anyway, one day her niece recommends that she takes an English class, which she ultimately ends up doing. And that's where she meets Josh Hartnett, who is her English teacher. Anyways, I won't go into too much more detail, but she develops a crush on him. And it's very interesting where it goes from there. This is a really interesting little drama. I recommend it. It's not often you really get to see Josh Hartnett get into good movies. And so I really enjoyed him in this. The main star also her name is Shinobu Terajima. And she is great. And I hope she's in more things soon. Have you guys heard of this movie at all?
Yeah, actually, I saw a trailer for it a while back, and I was really interested in watching it, so I'm glad to know that it's out now.
Yeah, I suggest giving it a watch. It's very good. It does not go where I thought it would go.
I'm intrigued. I haven't seen Josh Hartnett in anything since maybe that movie he did that was really independent, where he was like, it was during like the Wall Street crash after 9/11 or something like that.
Oh.
I don't remember the name of the movie.
August. It was called August.
Yeah, August. That's right.
And it came out in 2008.
Well, I guess it wasn't around 9/11 then. I don't remember what the movie is about necessarily.
It was about the stock market crash of 2008.
And it came out in 2008? That's fast.
It may have come out in 2009. I don't remember.
Okay,
It wasn't a very good movie. Ultimately, it's good to see Josh Hartnett back. Recently, he was in that Penny Dreadful show with Eva Green on Showtime.
Oh, okay, yeah. I did see bits and pieces of that when a friend was watching it, but I never watched it myself.
Yeah, it ultimately ended kind of too soon for it to have like a satisfying conclusion.
Right.
Didn't it end? And then after it, everybody watched it, thought it was the season finale, and then like the next day, they're like, "This is the series finale," and they kind of pulled the rug out from under everybody.
Something.
Is that a thing?
Like, I think they announced it at the beginning of the season.
Okay.
But like it was season 2 was 10 episodes, and then season 3 was coming out, and it was like 9 or 8 episodes or something. So it was shorter season. And then people were like, "What is this? This season's not as good as the last season." And then they were like, "And it's the last season." And everyone was like, "Oh, this sucks." And so
It'll be better than the next season because
you're not getting one.
Yeah, exactly. So ultimately, Penny Dreadful, it has moments of greatness, but ultimately, I don't think it wrapped up in a satisfying way. So, I don't think anyone really regards it as a good show anymore. But Oh, Lucy, Josh Hartnett is great in. And it's a return to him in indie movies, which is where I think he really shines the most. Give it a shot. It's really good.
Cool. I'm writing it down right now.
Yeah. Oh, Lucy.
How do you spell O?
Oh, H. All right, Chris, what about you? What's on your mind?
Well, I watched The Meg, and then I watched this new show on Netflix from Matt Groening called Disenchantment. Have you guys heard about it?
I have not. Netflix comes out with a show, like 3 shows a week. I can't keep up with them.
Yeah.
Right.
Heard of, never really looked into.
So, yeah, it's the new Netflix show from Matt Groening, and it takes place in a fantasy medieval world.
Of The Simpsons fame, right? Like he created The Simpsons.
Right, Simpsons and Futurama.
Is it an animation?
Yeah.
Okay.
And same style of The Simpsons, they don't have a chin. But I watched the first 3 episodes of it, and the first 2 were not very good. It was not paced very well, I don't think. Like, they would have a joke, and then it would be like a couple of beats. It just wasn't enough. Like, it wasn't quick enough on the jokes and stuff like that, and it just wasn't paced very well. But the 3rd episode got a little bit better, and I'm going to watch a couple more because it's Matt Groening, and I'll try it out for more. And I think it also takes a little while for Matt Groening to build his worlds. In the first season of The Simpsons or even Futurama, they slowly introduce new characters, and so I think I'll give it a little bit more time, but I'm not super impressed right now.
How many episodes are in the first season?
10, and then they've been greenlit for a 2nd season, and there's 10 more in that one.
I'm going to stop asking that question about new shows because every new show has 10 episodes.
Right.
It's like the go-to number now. Just like, I guess 22 or 22 used to be, or 24 or something. I don't know.
22 is too many and always was, in retrospect.
I think it's okay for sitcoms.
Maybe for sitcoms, but even then it's pushing it. Like, you could always be stronger with less episodes.
Yeah, spend more time on the 10 episodes as opposed to spreading yourself more thin over 22.
Mm-hmm. But I think that especially applies to dramas. Like any kind of network TV drama that has, 22 episodes a season, I don't even watch it anymore. Just because I know there's going to be unnecessary twists and turns. Unless I hear really great things later.
Yeah, oftentimes there's the filler episodes where nothing... I guess we're kind of used to being told one long story over 10 episodes, right? Whereas it used to be we'd watch 22 episodes and there'd be an overarching story sometimes, but you'd go off on these side tangents and stuff like that.
That's how you get things like Lost.
Exactly. And Lost probably is one of the first shows to take a step into that 10-episode territory because they're like, look, we can't fill this out. We're only going to do 3 more seasons of 10 episodes each, And
wait, did Lost do any 10-episode seasons?
No 10-episode seasons.
Was it 13?
They did 16-episode seasons towards the end.
Oh, that's still too many.
And then I think even maybe the last one was like 12 or 14 or something like that.
But wasn't that just because of a writer's block and not because of a writer's strike?
That's why it happened in season 4.
Yeah.
And that's the first time they broke from like 22 episodes. But even the seasons after, without the writer's strike, they limited the number of episodes to like 16.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And that's when they announced that they were going to have their final season, too. They're like, we're going to do 3 more seasons, and each one of them will be 16 episodes.
Yeah. I think I agree that Lost is probably one of the first ones and broke that barrier and got us to where we are today. Thanks, Lost.
All right, well, that's what I've been watching. You guys ready to move on to the main show?
Sure, let's do it.
Oh, yeah.
March. We've been dating for over a year now, and I think it's about time people met my beautiful girlfriend. What about us taking an adventure east?
Like Queens?
Singapore, Colin's wedding. Don't you want to be my family?
That's what I want! The Nick you're dating is Nick Young? Yeah, you guys know them or something?
Hells yeah. They're just the biggest developers in all of Singapore.
That's what I...
Damn, Rachel. It's like the Asian Bachelor.
These people aren't just rich. They're crazy rich.
Well, you really should have told me that you're like the Prince William of Asia.
That's ridiculous. Much more of a Harry.
Okay, so before we get going on Crazy Rich Asians, just wanted to let you know that if you have not seen the movie, it's okay. You can continue to listen. We are not going to give any spoilers away for the next little while. And before we start getting into spoilers, we're going to give you a warning, and there will be a bumper and plenty of time for you to hit pause, stop listening, go see the movie, come back, finish listening to the episode. You're welcome.
Crazy Rich Asians was directed by Jon M. It stars Constance Wu, Henry Golding, Michelle Yeoh, and the IMDb synopsis says, this contemporary romantic comedy based on the global bestseller follows a native New Yorker, Rachel Chu, to Singapore to meet her boyfriend's family. Who wants to go into their overall thoughts and expectations for Crazy Rich Asians?
I'll go ahead and go.
Okay.
Did you rhyme that on purpose?
I did not.
Well done.
Thank you.
Bravo.
Thank you, Crazy Rich Asians, for being named such.
All right, yeah, so rom-coms are not my favorite genre, and Jon M. Chu's previous work also not my favorite movies, like G.I. Joe, Retaliation, and stuff like that. So I wasn't super excited, and my expectations were pretty low going to this movie. But I will say I enjoyed this more than I thought I would enjoy it. I thought the actors were especially good. Constance Wu and Michelle Yeoh, they were really good, I thought. There were some really good visuals in this movie, and I think some of the camera work was really interesting as well. However, there's a lot of tropes that are just standard in the rom-coms, and there was one storyline specifically that I was not interested in, and I think some of the comic beats fall a little flat. But ultimately, I enjoyed it. What did you think, Mike?
Yeah, so this is a film I primarily heard about because of how important it is for representation. I don't think there's been a movie since, like, The Joy Luck Club in the 90s that has been a big studio movie with an all-Asian cast. So this movie, I wanted it to be good for that reason. I would feel bad if this ended up being like a flop or if everyone hated it, right? Because of that reason. Because it is so important for representation. So that's kind of where I was at going into it, but ultimately, I'm with you. Romantic comedies are not a genre that we see much of anymore, except for maybe some smaller indies. It's been a few years since we've really gotten any kind of mainstream rom-coms of quality, at least that I can recall.
I feel like the rom-coms we've been getting recently have been leaning more towards high concept, at least the ones I can think of, where like it's kind of a secondary to the plot.
Yeah, I was kind of address that in a minute, actually. So ultimately, I think this movie ends up being somewhere in the middle in terms of quality of romantic comedy. It's not up there in the pantheon of great romantic comedies like Charade with Audrey Hepburn or Cary Grant, or even last year's The Big Sick, nor is it as bad as whatever Katherine Heigl did last. You know, this movie is very silly, very self-aware. My issue is that it doesn't try to reach for anything special or new. This is very safe and middle of the road. But given the chance that the studio took on the all-Asian cast, I think it makes sense that they wanted to put it pretty slow, or play it pretty safe. Plus, it's based on a book, so I'm sure that represents the story pretty accurately. Also, I feel like this movie could have been much shorter by getting rid of some side plots that don't end up paying off in any kind of satisfying way. Ultimately, it's worth your time, but only just. And it is important, representation-wise. So if you are an Asian American or just Asian in general, I understand why this movie would be a big deal for you.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah. What about you, Justin?
Okay, so I was mostly aware of this movie from the like pre-trailer roll that's playing in the movies whenever you walk in to sit and sit in like before the trailers start in the theater. There was, one of those interviews with the cast sort of thing that was always going on at the theater close to my house. So I was seeing it from that, and they would show clips from it. And from that, I thought it seemed not very good. So I was not particularly excited to go see this movie, but then it got some, positive critic reviews. For a while, it was sitting at 100% on Rotten Tomatoes with like 30-something critical reviews in.
Yeah.
So, that piqued my interest a little bit because I, as opposed to you guys, I do love a rom-com. And I am more likely to watch a rom-com than most, I guess. Like, I would take my chances on a rom-com on the off chance that it's good just because I love them that much when they're good. So, yeah, that's where I was going in. So this movie, on a script level, I think has a lot of shortcomings. There's kind of a lot of bad dialogue that feels really expository. Like we're getting a lot of like rehash of the plot or a lot of like characters explicitly stating problems that we're kind of already aware of. I think the jokes, some of them feel like bad sitcom jokes to me. And despite what I had heard, that this film kind of exceeded the typical rom-com, I think the main plot that is the rom-com plot of the film does not do that. I think there are way too many cliches and tropes from every rom-com from the past like 20 years, maybe even longer than that, are in this film. That being said, I think there is some good cinematography. I think there's some really basic, uninteresting cinematography at points, but there are a few moments where I feel like the filmmaker has a lot of love for what he's photographing, and that showed in certain places. The other thing that is that I think generally the cast is good, and most important of all, they're mostly likable. All of the main characters, at least they were to me. There's aspects of the movie that I really like the culture, because most of the movie is set in Singapore. The whole idea of the movie being set around a wedding weekend in Singapore and dealing with like meeting all of these new family members and eccentric family characters and exploring the family dynamics and learning that was all kind of fun and interesting to me. And all of that kind of made a film for me that was like, it was kind of hard to dislike the film despite all of the script's shortcomings. Like there's something about it. It's like colorful and interesting looking. And it's all this like cultural stuff that I've never experienced, that I've never seen and maybe never will see. So in some ways, like I just found it hard to like hate what I was watching.
Yeah, I have something to add on to that, actually.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, yeah, so like you were saying, I did enjoy all of the characters for the most part. Some of them I feel like were a bit too much. Like you said, there is pretty much every kind of romantic comedy trope character in there. There's the gay friend who helps the clueless main lead woman do a makeover. There's the wisecracking friend who is like a Kat Dennings type. You have the jealous ex who wants to, you have all the tropes, right? You name it, they've got it in this movie.
The potential mother-in-law that doesn't get along with.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. None of that necessarily equals bad. There's a certain energy to this movie that doesn't exist in most movies. And I think it's like you were saying earlier, which is you could tell that the DP had a love for filming what he was filming in certain scenes. I think the same goes for the cast and for the director. All of them. This is a very important movie to them, I think. And I think that comes across in the movie. There's a certain energy that is just fun about this movie.
There's something, I think the key thing that you said was it's very hard to dislike this movie.
Mm-hmm. It's earnest. It's sweet. It's got so much heart behind it. It's easy to like, even though I'm not crazy about anything that really happens in it, if that makes sense.
Like for me, there's nothing really harsh or ugly or mean-spirited.
Yeah.
And I guess I say harsh, I mean like vulgar or anything like that, right? That like another comedy would try to get by on like, let's put a lot of swearing in this, or let's put some really like gross humor scenes in there, or like toilet humor or whatever,
Right. Raunchy stuff.
Yeah. It seems very innocent and likable.
Yeah, I agree. I think if I had to pick a criticism for this movie, like my main criticism, it's that I didn't feel enough. I was never sad. I was never worried. at any point the whole time. It's literally just me sitting down for 2 hours and some change and being happy, which isn't bad, but it could have been a little shorter, or throw some drama in there to make it a little bit more interesting. So we'll talk a little bit more in specifics, but that's kind of where I come down on it, which is it's serviceable, and for certain demographics, it's downright important. And I'm glad it's making money, but if I'm being honest, it could be a lot better.
I think, Mike, you're really right about this being an important movie.
Can you just say that one more time? I'm what?
As much as it pains me to say, you're right. It is a really important movie.
That's
I wish it were just a little bit better, so I could support it just a little bit more. But on that basis alone, I think go to the movie theater and vote with your wallet, right?
Yeah. Well, let's put it this way. I can recommend this rom-com over any rom-com that comes to mind in the past 5 years.
Yeah, over a Katherine Heigl or a Matthew McConaughey rom-com.
Yeah, Katherine Heigl was like so 10 years ago.
Yeah, and what I would also hope for... I
was
last
time I saw a rom-com, though.
Yeah.
What I would hope for is if I vote with my wallet, I get more diverse films, not rom-coms like this necessarily. Does that make sense? But I definitely want more diverse films. I'm voting for that for sure. But yeah, that's how I feel. Decent. If you got a date, go see it. Justin, what do you think?
To wrap up, I think what I can say is, without getting into spoilers, because I think it's kind of hard to talk about any of the stuff we've mentioned so far in any more depth without getting into spoilers. I'll say that what I really wanted from this movie, or wanted more of, is the moments of filming the culture, filming the event and the circumstance of why they're all there, and like letting the family dynamic kind of shine. I think the movie gets drugged down by like a really stereotypical plot and a lot of cliches, and where it's working the best for me is when it feels like a tapestry, like a family tapestry of this wedding weekend, where we're seeing the culture of Singapore. There's a scene where the whole family's sitting around a table making dumplings and talking, and that to me it's like 80% towards an interesting scene already, just by having so much culture and so many different diverse family members sitting there, and the scene is almost gets buried by the end, like by the plot that's happening in there at times. And it reminds me of another film. I don't know if either of you guys have seen it, but it's by Mira Nair, and it's called Monsoon Wedding.
Oh, yeah.
Have you guys seen that one?
It's the Indian film, right?
Right. So, yeah, it's an Indian film, and it is very similar. It's like set around a weekend with an Indian wedding, which the celebrations last like a few days. But it really embraces that tapestry element, when like not this one overarching plot. There's a lot of different things happening to it. And unlike this film, we're getting so many pieces. They can all kind of wrap up in their own way, some with finality, some kind of in the middle of their story, and they don't all have to be satisfying. Like, whereas in this film, Mike, you said that some of the side plots don't feel satisfying, and I think it's because they focus a little too much on them, and then don't really have the time to deliver. Check out Monsoon Wedding if you haven't seen it, because I think it's all of the things that work about this film, but for an entire movie. I guess I would also hesitantly recommend seeing this movie. I want you to go see it and support it for the diversity reasons, but as far as like if we're just going to go straight on quality of film, and I feel bad saying this, like I think you can certainly wait for this to come out and watch it at home. I don't think it necessitates going to the theater outside of supporting diversity. Yeah,
it feels like a poor man's Baz Luhrmann. Like John Chu really wanted to go for Baz Luhrmann, but just didn't have the capability of doing it or something,
That's a really good analogy. You're on fire today, Mike.
Thank you. But yeah, I agree with Justin 100%. Real quick, I wanted to touch on something you said before we move into spoilers.
Okay.
I enjoyed Michelle Yeoh's character's point of view, and I think this is what the movie brings to the table that a lot of American rom-coms can't, which is the point of view, right, of an Asian culture. She looks down on the American way of thinking, which is to follow your dreams and try to be happy in your life. She looks down on our main character for the Americanization that she has gone through during her time of living here, even though she is a Chinese immigrant. Anyway, I think that's all very interesting, and that's probably the most interesting aspect of the movie, And that is something that I wanted to touch on in non-spoilers because I feel like a lot of rom-coms don't have that kind of point of view.
Agreed. That was actually the most interesting relationship in the movie, was the Michelle Yeoh and Constance Wu.
Yeah, absolutely. Michelle Yeoh makes this movie, in my opinion. Most of the good things that this movie has to offer comes from her being great. I can talk more about her in spoilers. So
quick before we get into spoilers, we do have a listener question that is a spoiler-free question. Mike, do you want to read that?
Sure. So on Twitter, @BeardsReviews asks, do you think this is the start of a new generation of rom-coms? Ones that are filmed and written well versus lazily done like in the past? Okay, so we've kind of touched on this earlier. I will kick it off. I don't know that this qualifies as a rom-com that is written well, though it is written well if you compare it to the last few mainstream rom-coms we've gotten here in America, like anything Katherine Heigl was in.
God.
So
poor Katherine Heigl.
Well, she's the last rom-com I remember. What's that one with her and Ashton Kutcher where she was like a killer?
The Killers.
The Killers? Oh, see? That's what we had to work with.
There's been other ones, but they're most like indie. Like Steve Carell and Keira Knightley were in that one, Seeking a Friend for the End of the World. I remember that one. That was a while ago, though.
This is better than that.
Okay. Anyway, sorry. I just felt bad for Katherine Heigl.
Anyways, we have gotten some rom-coms. The good ones, though, I feel have been more indie-based, like The Big Sick. Even back to 2004, I'm thinking of Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. That is more interesting. So,
for sure.
What I would say is if this kicks off a new generation of like big studio rom-coms, that's fine. These are pretty unoffensive. They're not that bad, and they're mostly pretty good, and they have a lot of energy and love put behind them. So I would be down for the resurgence of the rom-com, just hopefully better than what it was about 10 years ago, you know?
Yeah, if they're all as pretty as this one, I'm down for it. When Crazy Rich Asians 2 comes out, which I bet it does. But if it looks as good as this one, I'm down for it. And as energetic and enthusiastic as this one is, I'm down for it, yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe this is a step towards a new generation of rom-coms. Like, I think it's a step towards that at best, as opposed to the start of a new generation. Because as we said, I really don't think the film was written well. I think it was filmed with love, acted with love, directed with love, and I like that about it. And so I hope that it is a new generation of rom-coms that are made from a passionate place of someone that feels a strong need to tell the story versus, something that's just kind of a money grab movie with, Katherine Heigl or, Cameron Diaz or whoever new rom-com stars are these days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
That's what I hope for. He's definitely right saying that they've been lazily done in the past. And I hope that this ushers in something that comes from a better place than the past ones.
I thought of another one. Leap Year with Matthew Good.
Oh, and
Amy Adams, right?
Yeah. Or is that Amy Adams or Isla Fisher?
Oh, damn it. Well, anyway, I feel like I saw the whole movie in the trailer.
I actually would just watch the trailer for Crazy Rich Asians before we recorded this just to refresh my brain, and I saw almost the whole movie in the trailer too.
Yeah, maybe it's just a trailer for rom-coms. But the point is, we could do with some more rom-coms. Hopefully, though, not just directed and acted with love, but also written with it as well.
Cool. So are we ready to move into spoilers?
I'm ready to move into spoilers.
Let's spoil this.
No, I guess Rosebud is just a piece in a jigsaw puzzle.
I'll tell you what. Give me one of them cigarettes you got up there, and I'll tell you all about it.
And here we go.
So, as I was saying in non-spoilers, I really enjoyed Michelle Yeoh's character quite a bit. And I enjoyed her particular point of view, which is something that's missing from a lot of American rom-coms, right? She is from Singapore, and she actually looks down on the American way of living your life, right? Which is, we always hear in America, follow your dreams, do what makes you happy. But she comes at it from a point of doing what makes you happy is not important if you are working towards your family's greater good and your legacy. And she is convinced that our main protagonist, Rachel, she's convinced that her priorities are all messed up and that she is too Americanized to understand or to fully get her son and her family, which is something I thought was the most interesting dynamic in the whole movie. What about you guys?
Yeah, definitely. There's the one point in the movie where she says, like, Americans only think about themselves. That's very interesting because you don't get that a lot, especially with like the mother-in-law character in a rom-com that like you're not supposed to like. It's always just kind of it's kind of a good versus evil, and that's that. Whereas this is a lot more gray. Like, and I think by the end you kind of understand, and she's not just being vicious for vicious sake. That was hard to say. So it's one of those things that like leans the movie towards being more likable, is that none of the characters are just straight up like awful and unlikable.
Exactly. And it's bedded down in Asian culture, but it's not something that is confusing to people who aren't in that culture. It just enriches the movie, and in my opinion, maybe that's what makes a movie that's so heavily influenced in Asian culture, that's what makes it worth it to make here in America, right? Is it brings us a new point of view and a new perspective on the same old boring romantic comedy tropes that we've had a million times. Maybe it doesn't do that enough, but it does do it a little bit, which is better than nothing, right?
Yeah, I agree. I really liked that relationship between those two characters and found that as the most interesting thing in the film. And the fact that we got to dive a little bit into these other cultures other culture is really cool. And because it was very trope heavy, maybe that's kind of what was interesting, is this other culture to it.
Yeah, the same old tropes we've seen a million times, but from a different point of view.
Yeah, and I think this is maybe the one scene I've seen that I can think of in like cinema or TV that's made me actually want to know how mahjong is played, so that I can read into like what's happening in the mahjong scene towards the end.
I used to play it on a computer program version, but I don't think it was what they were playing.
The same. But I think you can tell what happened is she lets the mom win, and then she flips over her hand and says, look, I could have won, and like, I let you win.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and, I guess, talk about that scene real quick. That was probably my favorite scene in the whole movie.
Yeah,
yeah,
it was mine too.
It's the only scene that I feel has any kind of
stakes.
Well, no, not even. Well, I'm trying to say this in a nice way because I really do enjoy the movie. It's the only scene I feel like had any kind of depth or nuance to it, right? Or hidden thing that you can get or not get. And even then, it's pretty easy to get. It shows that Rachel isn't the person that Michelle Yeoh's character thought she was. She thought Rachel was an Americanized Chinese immigrant who only thought of herself and wasn't capable of sacrificing anything that she cared about for the greater good, or she just viewed her as a selfish girl, basically. Then you find out that Rachel can give up things she wants for the greater good. She purposely lost. Also, she's giving up Nick, and letting her have Nick because Nick is ready to leave with her, and she doesn't want Nick to give up his family. So the whole purpose of that scene is her basically being like, hey, your son was willing to leave you, but because I do understand and I am willing to give up things that are important to me, I'm willing to give him to you because I know he's important to you, even though I will be sad. And that worked for me. That was probably the only scene with any kind of nuance in the whole movie that I noticed, and they didn't do too much over-explaining.
No, I think they kind of rely on just looks from Michelle Yeoh, basically from that point of the movie on, that kind of tell you everything you need to know. It's kind of one,
and she's
part
good
of
at
the
giving
movie.
Looks.
Yeah, they didn't actually put everything she was thinking into dialogue like they do in other points of the movie.
Exactly, and I appreciated it. And as a result, that was the point in the movie where I was the most in it.
Agreed. So just a couple of scenes that I really, really enjoyed. The wedding sequence I thought was spectacular. When the water comes in and they have the
I have notes
fireflies. About that. Yeah, that was done so well. And then the way it was cut, like from person to person, Constance Wu has like a little tear. It was just that scene was so good to me. That, and then there's one other scene. I think it wasn't the actual wedding. It was like the party before the wedding, not the bachelor party, but it was all one take as they're all talking and characters are walking in and out.
Yeah,
and I thought that was done really well as well, and enjoyed that scene as well. So there's like these moments of kind of really well shot things that I really enjoyed. So yeah.
If we can back up to the wedding.
Yeah, I have something to say about the wedding. You go first, Justin.
Okay, yeah, I really like that scene, and as I've said before, I think the dialogue in the script is not the best. I think it's not the best written, and this was one of the first times in the movie that I can think of where a lot of the main characters just kind of stopped talking for a while, and we got into portraying things with looks, and they mouth some words, and that's fine, but we kind of have music and looks and a lot of different emotions going on from all the characters without somebody overstating what they're feeling. And as you said, Chris, it's a beautiful scene. I think that's one of the things where I'm like, I can really see that scene in particular was made with so much love for the culture, for the ritual, for the set and the design and all of that. Like, it's kind of where the whole movie, kind of everything the movie's doing comes together as like kind of a little perfect scene where it's all adding up to like greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, I agree. So I think this scene is a perfect example of John Chu being a better director than a script he has. Because in that scene, you have characters portraying all the emotions you need, all through glances and looks. And you feel it. When Nick and Rachel look at one another in that scene, I felt it. You know what I mean? Like, it's not their wedding, right? But I felt their love in that scene.
Yeah. I think that was the first point of the movie where I knew that, like, this isn't going to go to some different area where they're not going to end up being together, not going to part their ways. I'm like, okay, right. I feel their love.
And I have something to say about that in a minute, too. But what I will say is I agree with you guys that this is probably the best directed scene. That said, the wedding itself, with the water coming into the room, is a little silly. No,
No, man, I disagree with that. I thought it was awesome. What? Like with the water coming in, and then they had the little
walking
things
around in her wedding dress in the water. What is the point of the water?
Extravagance.
It didn't even make it even any prettier or like set the mood anymore. It was
to me it did. To me, like it's like the scene in Little Mermaid where they're floating down the river and she's walking down the lake to meet her man. At the end, yeah. I really enjoyed it. I thought
I don't want to undersell it, but what I will say is everything about that scene worked for me except for the water. The water was just so over the top and like more trouble than it's worth for an effect that isn't really that cool or romantic. I don't know. To me, that was distractingly silly. But that's a pretty minor deal comparatively because the scene overall is great. And what really matters is Nick and Rachel.
Yeah, for me, there's so much extravagance in the movie and things that are ridiculous that they do because they have so much money. Like that at that point, I was they're Asians. Crazy rich, and at that point, I was just kind of letting go all of the stuff that they were buying and doing and spending money on. Like initially I was thinking of like, how much is this stuff costing? And at a certain point I had to let that go and not. Yeah, no,
that makes sense. That makes sense. But for some reason, I guess I was expecting something more extravagant, something to impress me more. But I want to touch on something else you said earlier, though. I was never really worried about Rachel and Nick's relationship. The movie never at any point felt sad. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing at this point. It's just mostly sweet the whole time.
Yeah.
So overall, I never felt the stakes, and I never worried about it, which might be a problem. But ultimately, the movie's so happy that I don't know that I would have walked away happier if I would have spent 20 minutes during the movie worried a little bit, So, I don't know if that's a legit complaint, but I did feel it at one point. And I remember thinking somewhere before the 2-hour mark that, I've spent this whole movie smiling, but I haven't really been invested or worried. And I think maybe I would have cared about the characters more had I been able to identify with them in that way. But maybe not. What do you guys think?
I think I'm going to go back to it, but the Constance Wu and Michelle Yeoh relationship is where you were supposed to worry. Like, Nick loved Rachel, and they were going to get married if they could, but it was up to the mother whether they were going to get married or not, right? In a weird sense. And I think that that's where the relationship and the worry is supposed to fit in. I don't know that I ever was concerned that they weren't going to get married or the mom wasn't going to approve of it by the end. But I think the Michelle Yeoh and Constance Wu is where we were supposed to be focused as opposed to on Nick and Rachel.
Yeah, it makes sense. I'll buy that.
Well, so I guess I'll explain what I said a little bit deeper. When I say that that's like the first scene where I felt like, okay, they're going to end up together. What I mean by that is that prior to that point in the movie, as far as like chemistry and characters go, I didn't quite feel the love between them. And partnered with the stuff I had heard about this movie kind of surpassing the typical rom-com and exceeding that sort of stereotype, I thought there may be something to that. But it also, I think the reason that I wasn't feeling it up to that point was because of some of the kind of clunky dialogue, and I don't want to call it clunky acting because I think it was they were working with the dialogue they had in some places, but it was like in that scene where I actually started to feel the connection between the two as an audience member, more so than like I was worried previously that they wouldn't end up together even though they were in love.
Right. Okay. That's the first time you were like, they're good together.
Yeah, exactly.
You felt the chemistry,
yeah. That makes sense. I get it. And let me just say real quick, the two leads in this movie, Henry Golding and Constance Wu, they are fantastic.
Yeah, I really liked him, more so than I thought I would, based on like the trailer. I thought he was really charming.
Yeah, he was charming. I liked him.
How do you guys feel about Ken Jeong? I feel like sometimes he fits, but he's got to fit in. Like I think opinions. In Community, he fits into Community, right? But he can't play that same character in everything because I feel like he just kind of stuck out in this movie like a sore thumb, and he didn't fit into it, right?
Yeah. Well, I've got thoughts about that. I actually am glad you brought that up because I had forgotten about him.
Yeah, maybe it was better off if we left it.
Yeah.
But what do you think, Mike? I didn't necessarily like the way he was in here, and I wish they had to cast somebody else. Yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay. So I would say 9 times out of 10, I do not like him at all. I like the man. He seems like a lovely man.
Yeah.
Right? But he did not make me laugh in The Hangover. In Community, I felt like they never knew what to do with him. And even near the end of the show, they even make jokes about not knowing what to do with his character. Because he was just so off the wall and zany in Community. In this movie, I liked him better than I've ever liked him before.
Oh, okay.
Which is to say that I didn't like him very much.
Well, I would agree with that. I did actually like him to an extent. He's maybe one of my least favorite of the side, less important characters.
Right.
I think the saving grace for him to me was that he started off so annoying in his the first time he appears in the movie, and then he kind of drops that and is like, I'm just kidding. I actually don't have that crazy accent and I'm not that weird. And that made him a little more likable because I was like, okay, that's what he could have been that the whole movie.
Exactly. So he made me laugh in that scene, and he actually made me laugh whenever he calls his daughter, played by Awkwafina, like the Asian Ellen.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was pretty funny. Yeah.
That whole segment made me laugh. I think what ultimately failed with his character wasn't even his fault. It was just in the direction and the silliness of the moment. But ultimately, I don't even really fault the movie for this. But there's a scene where there's a montage of Rachel getting ready to go somewhere. And there's just a whole montage of her trying on clothes and getting ready. And then there's other characters who are just in the house acting silly and dancing in front of the camera for a couple shots in amongst all this montage stuff. I really hated that.
That was probably the tropiest.
Exactly. It just felt the most silly, the most ridiculous. But even when I say I hate it, I don't hate anything about this movie. It's fine. It's totally rom-com-y, totally tropey. But if this movie didn't have the love put behind it and like the energy that just kind of oozes out of the film and makes it infectious and fun to see from all the people making it, I feel like that would be a terrible scene.
Yeah. On that note, I wanted to ask you guys, what did you think about the blonde friend? I guess her name in the movie is Peik Lin, played by Awkwafina. Did you guys like her? Did you guys not like her? Because she has a very abrasive sense of humor, I think, abrasive style of humor in the movie.
Yeah, I would say mixed results. She got a lot of laughs in my theater, but then there was also a lot of silence. So I would say about 50-50 with her.
Yeah, definitely mixed results. I liked her, and I thought she was charming for the most part.
She's a Kat Dennings type.
Yeah, and I was glad that she wasn't Kin Jong. If I was glad Kin Jong wasn't in it as much as her.
Right. There were some moments where I felt like I kind of wish she had been there to break up scenes that were less enjoyable or not particularly interesting. Because I kind of found the scene where she goes to the bachelorette party and they're having massages. And
I was about to say I could have used her during the bachelorette party.
Yeah. So there were moments where I missed her. And you guys are right that not everything she does works. There are some moments that don't land, but I found her generally a fun person to be around, and I enjoyed the scenes that she was in more than a lot of the scenes that she wasn't in, at least in terms of humor.
Oh yeah, she worked most of the time for me personally.
And in regards to the whole bachelorette scene, there is a plot in there of the ex-girlfriend kind of intimidating Rachel, and then they end up leaving the dead fish in her bed and writing "you gold digging bitch" on the window or whatever in fish blood, I assume. And
that part shocked me.
It did shock me. It was kind of the one nasty, ugly part of the movie that I found myself not liking.
Yeah, I was like, yikes.
Because it wasn't funny, and then it ultimately didn't add up to anything because they just bury the fish, and she kind of tells him about it later, and she's mad at him briefly for not mentioning the ex-girlfriend, but it doesn't cause any issues. It doesn't cause anything that adds up. I think that could go, and we would still get all of the stuff that was good about the movie,
I think we get her mental stress from it, but it doesn't affect her relationship with any other characters.
Right.
I think it does. Because I think that's the moment where she can bond with the sister.
Well, I would say that matters, except for the sister and her never really have a scene after that where bonding is important. Where their relationship comes back to be good thing I bonded with you that one time.
So, I mean, it feels like it's extra where they could have cut that, but that's why it's in there.
Yeah, it's why it's in there, but I think there's no scene to pay it off, so it ultimately could have gone.
Well, we had already established the sister Astrid and Rachel's friendship. They knew each other previously, right? Because Rachel had talked about getting excited to see Astrid again. So they had a pre-existing relationship that would merit Astrid coming to talk to Rachel. That I don't think we quite needed that setup to get us to that point. Because I know what you mean, Chris, that in order for Rachel to comfort the sister, that's how they got them together. And I think that is important in a way because it's kind of keeping the movie from totally dumping on Rachel the whole time and letting her do something other than just get dumped on. It allows her to help someone in the family and do something other than just worry, if that makes sense.
Oh, you mean whenever she hears about the affair?
Yeah. Because that's what happens after they bury the fish.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I thought for some reason you were talking about Astrid's problems, but I get it now. Makes sense. Yeah. No. Ultimately, it bonds them and allows us to really understand what's in Astrid's mind, because normally Astrid is such a stoic character that it also doubles as her cutting loose moment, so we can bond with her more. But ultimately, to mixed results, in my opinion. And actually, while we're talking about this, that brings us to a listener question.
Yeah, so Becca Burton on Facebook sent in this question. She said, "Hi, guys. I'd like to know your thoughts on the subplot involving the cousin, Astrid. I think I called her the sister earlier, but it's the cousin. And her husband. Did you find their story to be relevant?" So this is the cousin and her husband who she ends up finding out that he's having an affair.
Right, the one who went to the bachelorette party with Rachel, and ultimately this is the subplot in the movie that I feel like really doesn't serve a purpose. I feel like maybe it could serve a purpose in a longer movie with more scenes that we're missing. But right now, I think we get ultimately maybe 3 scenes with Astrid where she tells us what's on her mind and what's going on with her. And ultimately, we just don't care about any of this. At least I didn't.
I didn't either.
Yeah, we don't get to know their relationship that much. And it'd be different if the ratio, like she's the B plot and the A plot is Rachel and Nick. It'd be different if the ratio was like 60-40 on which plot we were following. But I feel like this plot is in there maybe like less than 10 minutes of the movie.
Yeah, and it doesn't fit with the rest of the movie. It's more of a drama aspect.
Exactly. It's got a different tone. It's not explored in any kind of satisfying way.
Now, I see what they're trying to do because he's dealing with all the pressure from her having all the money. She hides all her purchases around the house so that he doesn't see them and feel bad that she has all the money. And so that pressure, that family pressure, is supposed to illuminate our hero, the Constance Wu character.
But see,
it doesn't work.
Yeah, even then, it doesn't work because it'd be different if she were just a wealthy family. But the way the movie portrays her is she is the richest family on the island, or one of, right? So if you marry into, and knowingly marry into, the richest family in the island that you live on, why would you even remotely for a moment have hang-ups about not making as much money as she has?
Well, I think that's a cultural thing, right?
But why marry her? Like, it's not explored in a way to where, like, this guy made any sense to me.
Yeah,
Did he not
that makes sense.
think ahead to, like, how's this going to make me feel as a man in 5 years? Like, plan ahead. This isn't interesting. I don't want to watch a guy who, like, rushed into marriage and he's like, oh, my wife is too rich and it makes me feel like a bad guy, so I'm going to cheat on her. Boring. This didn't make me feel anything. The whole time I was like, if she forgives him for any amount of time, she's dumb. Yeah. And she does kind of forgive him. Like, ultimately she dumps him, which she should do. I don't know. That wasn't explored in a satisfying way to me. Like, I understand, like, it's a cultural thing and the man needs to make more money, but their whole marriage should have just fallen apart years ago, if that was the case.
Yeah, I agree. I just don't think it necessarily fit in a longer film where they could have explored it further. Yeah, or a TV show.
Yeah, I mean, give us 2 more scenes of something.
It feels like it didn't really work. But then because of other storylines intersecting with that storyline, they had to leave it in.
They had to leave at least the skeleton of it in there, right? I'm actually sure there are some scenes of this plot line that we are missing. That ultimately, that they just decided broke up the pacing or just no one cared or whatever.
They thought the movie was too long.
Yeah, but since she interacts with Rachel so much and she interacts with Nick so much, they couldn't cut her character out altogether.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's one of those things where if there were more side plots with other characters and their love lives, it would make more sense. If it were like an ensemble piece where you had like 5 stories that you were cutting between of like modern day Asian romance, you know?
Well, it's like one additional plot line as opposed to like 3 or 4, so it feels like it has some balance. Whereas this, it's just balanced against the main plot, which is overwhelming it. Right. So it feels unbalanced.
Exactly, which only helps to accentuate how out of place it seems. So give us 2 or 3 more plots or cut this one down tremendously and just focus on Rachel and Nick.
And so one thing I do want to say about the movie, we've talked a lot about some of the stereotypical rom-com elements. I do like that all of these issues never threaten the wedding. You know what I mean? Like, they don't get in the way of the event at all, which I feel like in other rom-coms they might ruin the wedding. Nick might have to run off and chase Rachel instead of showing up and being the best man for the wedding or something like that,
Well, they managed to get those tropes in, but not in like a way that's so immediate. Like, he still has to chase her to an airport and chase her onto a plane to get her back.
Sure.
But it's not done like he has to give up being the best man in the wedding to go save her.
Right, and that's what would happen in another one, because they try to up the stakes as much as possible, and it's like, well, that's got to happen at wedding time.
Yeah, they just find a way to put all the tropes in without any sense of immediacy.
which maybe that's to a fault in some ways, but I kind of like that about this. That it
I did too.
Avoids those and lets the main event happen, lets the culture and the backdrop shine. Like it lets it exist as a backdrop as opposed to like in some ways becoming part of the plot specifically, if that makes sense.
It does. I agree.
All right. Do you guys have anything else?
The only other thing I wanted to say was this is a very strong female-centric movie. The family is very matriarchal. In fact, I don't know if we ever even meet Nick's dad or even see a picture of Nick's dad.
Yeah, he's gone on business the whole movie. He had
exactly,
to go take care
and
of
that's all you need to know. And so the movie is written for the women. The most interesting characters are the women, and the actresses step up their game and they deliver. So ultimately, see it because, like I said, Constance Wu and Michelle Yeoh alone are worth your time.
Yeah, and I think we get a handful of fun side characters. We've talked a bit about Awkwafina and Ken Jeong. I want to say I do like Ronnie Chang, who is from The Daily Show. Are you guys familiar with him?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I knew I recognized him, but I didn't know from where.
He's the guy that when they introduce him, he's like with his 2 kids and the wife taking pictures, and they're asking him to do a different pose, and he's like, "No,
with
this is our optimal
poses.
angles." Yeah, which that was one of my favorite jokes in the movie. Is like later on they ask him to take a picture, and he's like, "Quick, optimal angles," and they all like assume that pose.
Yeah, that was pretty funny.
I thought that was really funny.
And the way he talked reminded me a lot of like a Joe Pesci type.
Yeah, it was
like a kind of a know-it-all, fast talker, big mouth.
He's one of my favorite current. If he's, I assume he's still current because I haven't watched Daily Show in a while. But since like Trevor Noah took over, he's been one of my favorite like correspondents that comes on and does a bit. Like he's really funny to me, and he worked in this movie more so than some of those other side, like the director and the girlfriend. I didn't like at all because I didn't think they did anything with it.
Oh yeah, I kind of liked how her story wrapped up whenever the cousin or whatever was like, "Hey, if you want a wedding like this, that's the guy you got to go after."
Oh yeah,
and points her to an even bigger loser in the family. So that made me laugh a little bit.
Cool.
All right, guys, that does it for our review of Crazy Rich Asians. Thank you so much for listening. Before we go, we did have a closing question, and we wanted to go ahead and ask, if you liked Crazy Rich Asians, what is a movie that you would recommend?
Cool. I'll go first.
Okay.
And that's kind of because I've already said mine, and I forgot that we were going to do this question, so I've already spoiled my answer, but I've got to double down on my recommendation for Monsoon Wedding by Mira Nair, because it is just everything that was, to me, that was great about this movie that really makes it stand out, but way more polished, way more artfully shot, a better script, better blend of characters. Like it really embraces that tapestry sort of film. And like you said, Mike, if this had 4 or 5 plots like the sisters or like the cousins, Monsoon Wedding kind of accomplishes what you were saying would have made this one better, right? And
right.
It's just beautiful. It's colorful, and there's a lot of like Indian culture in it, obviously, because it's an Indian wedding that I find like just really inherently interesting. So yeah, that's my recommendation.
All right, cool. I'll go next. So I want to go ahead and recommend a very old romantic comedy, but one of my favorites. And I mentioned it a little bit earlier in the show, and that is Charade with Audrey Hepburn and Cary Grant. It is about a widow who gets caught up in some espionage that she doesn't quite understand, and she has to rely on the ever so charming Cary Grant to guide her through it. But the problem is, can she even trust him?
Bum, bum, bum.
Indeed.
And the widow, I don't know if you said this, but the widow is played by Audrey Hepburn.
I did say it, but you know what?
Okay.
You can never say it's starring Audrey Hepburn too much. So it's starring Audrey Hepburn. It's wonderful. Go see it. Don't go see it, but buy it. It's great.
It's a smile ear to ear one the whole time for me. Like much like, maybe I wasn't smiling ear to ear, but I was certainly smiling and just kind of.
Don't lie. It was ear to ear. I saw it.
Anyway,
you
saw that? Damn it.
It did. I saw it. It was great though. Charade in the Criterion Collection. It's wonderful. It was remade in the 90s with a movie called The Truth About Charlie, starring Mark Wahlberg and Tandy Newton, which you should not see.
That's no offense to Mark Wahlberg or Tandy Newton. Well, maybe a little offense to Mark Wahlberg, but he is no Cary Grant and she's no Audrey Hepburn.
No, that's true to both of those things, especially to Mark Wahlberg, who is no Cary Grant.
Yeah. What
about you, Chris?
Yeah, I'm going to go with a movie called The Big Sick, starring Audrey Hepburn. Oh, no, not Audrey Hepburn. I'm going to go with The Big Sick because of the way that Crazy Rich Asians deals with the parents in the same way Camille Nanjiani has to deal with the parents in The Big Sick. The Big Sick's a movie about a guy that's dating this girl, and then she falls into a coma, and he hasn't met the parents, but they hang out in the hospital for the next 2 weeks while they wait for her to get out of the coma. If she gets out of the coma.
Right. And there are cultural differences involved between the family and the boyfriend.
So I think that is very similar, and we've already talked about it a little bit earlier, but it's because it makes sense that it goes well together. Have you seen this one yet, Justin?
No, I haven't. I want to so bad, and I haven't. I hate myself right now.
Yeah, you should. Yeah. Because especially, I think you would really like this movie. So
yeah, I think Ray Romano is great in this movie.
Audrey Hepburn is phenomenal in this film.
Yeah. Is she? Or was she dead before it was ever filmed, Chris?
Oh, you got me, Mike.
Well, you didn't know there's a poster on the wall at one point. And it's great back there.
Yeah.
I don't know if
All right.
All right, so I think that does it for this episode, right?
I think so.
Yeah, does it for me.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for listening, and thanks as always to Jake Wagner Russell for doing our intro and outro music. If you want to hear more of his music, you can do so at soundcloud.com/bobscotch.
All right, so our next episode will be a casually Criterion episode on Alfred Hitchcock's Notorious.
Yay, Criterion time. I'm so excited.
Yeah, so join us for that casually Criterion, and we will be back next week also with another wide release movie, most likely.
Yeah, don't forget to review us on iTunes. Give us that 5-star rating. Give us the review. Let us know what you think of the show, what you like, what you don't like. And you can also send your feedback on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to @CasualCineCast.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for listening, guys, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Also, our podcast next week will be starring Audrey Hepburn.
She's going to be here?
Yeah, we're going to seance.
I better go get a haircut.